Imagine waking up every day feeling a tight knot in your chest, a quiet panic whispering that something terrible might happen. Fear and anxiety have a way of stealing your peace, controlling your decisions, and convincing you that you are powerless even when you are capable, strong, and prepared. What if I told you there is a way to stop this cycle? A method that doesn't just mask fear but actually removes its grip. Today, you're about to discover the secret that rewires your mind, strengthens your inner resolve, and gives you real authority over anxiety so you can live boldly and confidently. Fear grows most powerfully in places where uncertainty is left unanswered by truth. It does not begin as a loud, overwhelming force. Instead, it starts quietly, like a small shadow in the mind. When a person does not fully understand a situation, the mind naturally tries to fill the gaps. Unfortunately, it often fills those gaps with worst-case scenarios rather than realistic possibilities. This is because the human mind is wired for survival, and survival instincts tend to focus more on danger than safety. As a result, when uncertainty appears, the mind begins to imagine threats even when none are immediately present. Over time, these imagined threats start to feel real, and once they feel real, they begin to control emotions, decisions, and behavior. The absence of truth creates a vacuum, and fear rushes in to occupy that empty space. Truth in this sense is not merely facts but also clarity, understanding, and perspective. When a person lacks accurate information about their future, their abilities, or their circumstances, they begin to rely on assumptions. These assumptions often come from past negative experiences, social conditioning, or personal insecurities. For example, someone who once failed at an opportunity may assume that all future attempts will end the same way. That assumption becomes their perceived truth, even though it is only a fragment of reality. In this way, uncertainty mixed with false conclusions becomes fertile ground where fear grows stronger. Another way fear expands in uncertainty is through the habit of overthinking. When there is no clear direction or answer, the mind tends to circle around possibilities endlessly. Each thought leads to another, and gradually those thoughts move from what could happen to what will probably go wrong. This mental pattern amplifies anxiety because the brain begins reacting as if the imagined outcomes are already happening. The body then responds with stress signals, creating a cycle where uncertainty produces fear, fear produces physical tension, and that tension reinforces the sense of danger. Truth interrupts this cycle because it brings stability and grounding. When a person actively seeks accurate understanding, they replace vague worries with clear awareness. This does not mean that uncertainty disappears completely, but it means that uncertainty no longer dominates the mind. Truth provides perspective, reminding a person of past victories, present strengths, and realistic possibilities instead of imagined disasters. It allows the mind to evaluate situations calmly rather than emotionally. Ultimately, fear's strength lies not in actual threats but in the unknown spaces within the mind. The less clarity a person has, the more room fear has to expand. But when truth consistently fills those spaces through knowledge, reflection, and disciplined thinking, fear gradually loses its ability to control thoughts and emotions, and uncertainty transforms from a source of panic into a normal part of life that can be faced with confidence. Anxiety feeds on imagination that is not disciplined because the human mind has a natural tendency to create pictures of the future, especially when it feels uncertain or threatened. Imagination itself is not negative. In fact, it is one of the greatest gifts a person possesses. It allows people to dream, plan, innovate, and prepare for possibilities. However, when imagination operates without control or guidance, it often becomes a tool that magnifies fear rather than building hope. Instead of picturing success, safety, or solutions, the mind begins to visualize failure, danger, and worst-case scenarios. Over time, these repeated mental images start to feel realistic, even when they are not based on actual evidence. This happens because the brain does not clearly distinguish between a vividly imagined threat and a real one. When a person repeatedly imagines something going wrong, the body reacts with the same stress responses as if the event were happening in real time. The heart rate increases, muscles tighten, and the mind becomes hyper alert. This creates a loop where anxious thoughts produce physical symptoms, and those physical symptoms reinforce the belief that something is truly wrong. The person then interprets their racing heart or tension as confirmation that their fears must be valid, even though the source of the fear exists only in their imagination. Undisciplined imagination also tends to focus on what-if thinking. This pattern involves constantly projecting negative possibilities into the future. Instead of asking, what can I do now? The mind repeatedly asks questions like, what if I fail? What if things get worse? What if I lose everything? Each of these questions opens a new door for anxiety to grow. Because the future is unknown, the mind fills it with uncertainty, and uncertainty naturally leans toward negative assumptions when it is not guided by logic or truth. As a result, a person may spend more energy worrying about events that never occur than actually dealing with real challenges. Another reason anxiety thrives in uncontrolled imagination is the mind's bias toward remembering past painful experiences more strongly than positive ones. When imagination draws from memory, it often selects the most emotionally intense moments, such as failures, rejections, or losses. These memories then become the foundation for imagined future outcomes. A person who once experienced disappointment may unconsciously expect the same outcome repeatedly, even in completely different situations. This mental pattern creates a false sense of inevitability, where the individual believes negative outcomes are certain rather than possible. Discipline in imagination does not mean suppressing thoughts or ignoring potential risks. Instead, it involves learning to guide the mind intentionally. This includes challenging unrealistic assumptions, balancing negative possibilities with positive ones, and focusing on present actions rather than distant uncertainties. When imagination is disciplined, it becomes a tool for planning and hope rather than a source of fear. It allows a person to visualize solutions, growth, and resilience instead of disaster. When imagination remains uncontrolled, anxiety continues to draw strength from endless mental scenarios that have no grounding in reality, gradually shaping emotions, decisions, and self-perception until the imagined fears begin to feel more powerful than actual life experiences. The human mind is designed in such a way that it cannot remain empty for long. It constantly seeks stimulation, direction, and focus. Thoughts are always flowing, whether a person is aware of them or not. When there is no intentional effort to fill the mind with something constructive, it naturally drifts toward whatever is most emotionally charged. And unfortunately, negative thoughts often carry stronger emotional weight than positive ones. This is why fear, worry, and doubt can easily take root when the mind is left unattended. An empty mental space does not stay neutral. It becomes an open door through which anxiety can quietly enter and settle. This happens because the brain is wired to prioritize survival. From an evolutionary perspective, humans learn to pay close attention to potential threats in order to stay safe. As a result, the mind automatically scans for danger and uncertainty. When there is nothing meaningful occupying attention, the brain begins to search for problems to solve or risks to anticipate. Even in safe environments, it may create imagined concerns simply because it is trying to fulfill its protective function. Without deliberate input, this natural tendency causes the mind to fill itself with worries, past regrets, or fears about the future. Another reason the mind cannot stay empty is that thoughts operate through momentum. One idea leads to another, forming chains of mental activity. When a person allows negative thoughts to begin, they often multiply quickly. For example, a small worry about an upcoming task can expand into fears about failure, then into doubts about personal ability, and eventually into a broader sense of insecurity. This process happens automatically when the mind lacks a stronger guiding focus. In this way, the absence of positive or purposeful thinking creates conditions where fear can grow freely. Filling the mind with something stronger than fear means intentionally directing attention toward thoughts that promote stability, clarity, and confidence. This can include focusing on solutions rather than problems, recalling past successes instead of failures, or engaging deeply in meaningful activities. When the mind is occupied with constructive ideas, there is less room for anxious thoughts to take hold. Just as a room filled with light leaves no space for darkness, a mind filled with purposeful thinking leaves little opportunity for fear to dominate. The quality of what fills the mind also determines emotional experience. When a person consistently exposes themselves to negative influences, such as constant criticism, alarming information, or pessimistic conversations, their thoughts naturally mirror those inputs. On the other hand, when they intentionally surround themselves with encouraging knowledge, supportive environments, and constructive perspectives, their mental patterns gradually shift toward resilience and calm. The mind reflects what it repeatedly absorbs, shaping emotional responses accordingly. Because the mind is always active, managing its content becomes essential for emotional well-being. It requires conscious effort to choose what occupies attention, to challenge unhelpful thoughts, and to replace them with ideas that promote strength and clarity. Without this intentional guidance, the mind defaults to its survival-based patterns, often filling itself with worries and imagined threats that can gradually influence behavior, mood, and overall outlook on life. Most fear is not rooted in present reality, but in assumptions about what might happen in the future. The human mind naturally tries to predict outcomes as a way to prepare for possible challenges. But this predictive ability can easily become distorted when it is guided by uncertainty rather than evidence. Instead of evaluating situations based on current facts, the mind begins constructing scenarios that have not occurred, often focusing on negative possibilities. These imagined outcomes then start to influence emotions as if they were already real, creating fear even when there is no immediate danger. This process happens because the brain prefers certainty, even if that certainty is negative. When faced with the unknown, it attempts to fill in missing information quickly. Since uncertainty feels uncomfortable, the mind often chooses to assume the worst as a way of preparing for potential threats. This pattern is sometimes referred to as catastrophic thinking, where a small possibility is exaggerated into a large, frightening outcome. For example, a simple delay in receiving a response from someone might lead to assumptions of rejection, conflict, or failure, even though the delay may have harmless explanations. Over time, repeated exposure to these assumptions trains the mind to expect negative outcomes automatically. Past experiences play a major role in shaping these assumptions. Why? When a person has previously faced disappointment, loss, or failure, the brain stores those memories strongly because of their emotional intensity. Later, when similar situations arise, the mind uses those memories as a reference point to predict future outcomes. This creates a mental shortcut where past pain becomes the lens through which future possibilities are viewed. As a result, a person may assume that upcoming events will end the same way as previous negative experiences, even when circumstances are entirely different. Another factor that strengthens fear based on assumptions is the tendency to overestimate risks while underestimating personal ability to cope. When imagining the future, the mind often focuses heavily on what could go wrong while ignoring the skills, resources, or support systems available to handle challenges. This imbalance creates a distorted perception where potential threats appear larger than they truly are. The individual begins to feel powerless, not because of actual circumstances, but because of imagined limitations. Social and environmental influences also contribute to fear rooted in assumptions. Constant exposure to negative news, alarming stories, or pessimistic opinions can shape a person's expectations about life. When someone repeatedly hears about dangers, failures, or worst-case scenarios, those ideas become mentally accessible and more likely to appear in their own thinking. Over time, this creates a worldview where the future is seen as inherently threatening rather than full of possibilities. Assumptions about the future often lack concrete evidence, yet they feel convincing because they are repeated frequently in the mind. Each repetition strengthens emotional responses, making imagined fears seem increasingly realistic. As these patterns continue, a person may begin avoiding opportunities, hesitating to make decisions, or limiting personal growth based on outcomes that have never actually occurred. This demonstrates how powerful assumptions can be in shaping behavior, even when they are disconnected from present reality. Confidence is not simply a personality trait that some people naturally possess while others lack. It is deeply connected to a person's inner awareness and the strength of their convictions about who they are and what they believe they can handle. When individuals have a clear understanding of their identity, values, and purpose, they develop a stable foundation that supports confidence even in uncertain situations. Without this internal clarity, confidence becomes fragile, easily shaken by external opinions, temporary failures, or unexpected challenges. This is why many people who appear capable on the outside may still struggle with fear internally if they do not have a strong sense of inner conviction. Spiritual awareness, in a broad sense, refers to a deep recognition that life is larger than immediate circumstances. It involves understanding that personal worth and purpose are not solely defined by achievements, social approval, or current conditions. When individuals cultivate this awareness, they begin to view challenges from a wider perspective. Instead of interpreting difficulties as personal threats, they see them as temporary experiences within a much larger journey. This shift in perception reduces the emotional intensity of fear because the individual no longer feels completely defined or limited by present obstacles. Inner conviction plays a crucial role in strengthening confidence because it provides certainty even when external conditions remain uncertain. Conviction is formed through repeated reflection, personal experiences, and alignment between beliefs and actions. When a person consistently acts in accordance with their values and observes positive outcomes, their trust in themselves grows. Over time, this trust becomes a stable internal reference point. Even when faced with unfamiliar or intimidating situations, individuals with strong conviction rely on this internal foundation rather than external reassurance. Another way spiritual awareness contributes to confidence is by reducing the excessive focus on outcomes. Many fears arise from the desire to control results, such as success, approval, or security. When individuals develop a deeper sense of meaning that extends beyond immediate results, they become less emotionally dependent on specific outcomes. This allows them to approach challenges with calm determination rather than anxiety. They focus on effort, growth, and learning instead of worrying constantly about whether events will unfold perfectly. Inner conviction also influences how people interpret setbacks. Without strong internal beliefs, failures may be perceived as evidence of personal inadequacy, leading to diminished confidence. However, individuals with deep conviction tend to interpret setbacks differently. They view them as part of the process of development rather than as final judgments of their ability or worth. This perspective allows them to maintain emotional stability even when facing difficulties, which gradually reinforces their sense of confidence. The relationship between confidence and inner awareness is also reflected in decision making. When people lack clarity about their identity or purpose, they often seek validation from others before making choices. This dependence increases anxiety because external opinions are unpredictable and sometimes conflicting. In contrast, individuals who have cultivated strong inner conviction rely more on their internal guidance. They still consider external advice, but their decisions are ultimately grounded in their own understanding and values, which strengthens their sense of control and reduces fear. As individuals continue to deepen their awareness and reinforce their convictions through consistent reflection and experience, their confidence gradually becomes less influenced by temporary circumstances, allowing them to face challenges with greater stability and emotional resilience. Peace is often misunderstood as something that happens automatically when life becomes free from problems, stress, or uncertainty. Many people believe that once circumstances improve, calmness will naturally follow. However, real peace does not function this way because life rarely becomes completely free of challenges. Situations change, responsibilities grow, and unexpected events continue to occur. If peace depended only on external conditions, it would always remain temporary and unstable. This is why peace is better understood as a learned state that develops through consistent practice and intentional mental habits rather than something that appears on its own. The human mind naturally reacts to uncertainty with alertness and tension because it is designed to detect potential threats. This reaction was historically necessary for survival, helping individuals respond quickly to danger. In modern life, however, this same mechanism often activates in response to everyday stressors such as deadlines, social pressures, or future worries. Without training, the mind tends to remain in a constant state of mild alertness, which gradually transforms into anxiety. Learning peace involves retraining these automatic responses so that the mind does not interpret every challenge as a threat. Developing peace requires awareness of thought patterns. Many people are not fully conscious of how frequently their minds jump from one worry to another. This constant mental activity prevents calmness because the brain rarely has an opportunity to rest. When individuals begin to observe their thoughts without immediately reacting to them, they gain the ability to slow down this cycle. This awareness allows them to choose which thoughts deserve attention and which can be allowed to pass without emotional engagement. Another important aspect of learning peace is emotional regulation. Emotions arise naturally in response to experiences, but they do not have to dictate behavior or mental focus. Training in peace involves recognizing emotions without becoming overwhelmed by them. For example, when frustration or fear appears, individuals can learn to pause, breathe, and reflect rather than reacting impulsively. Over time, this practice strengthens the ability to remain calm, even in situations that previously triggered strong emotional responses. Consistency is essential because peace develops gradually through repetition. Just as physical strength grows through regular exercise, mental calmness grows through repeated practice of steady thinking, reflection, and relaxation techniques. Activities such as focused breathing, mindful attention, and deliberate positive thinking help create new mental habits. With time, these habits become automatic, allowing individuals to maintain a sense of calm more easily, even during stressful circumstances. Learning peace also involves shifting perspective about control. Much anxiety arises from trying to manage every possible outcome or eliminate all uncertainty. When individuals accept that not everything can be controlled, they reduce the pressure placed on their minds. This acceptance does not mean giving up responsibility. Instead, it means focusing energy on actions that can be influenced while letting go of excessive worry about factors beyond personal control. As these skills are practiced consistently, the mind gradually adapts, forming new patterns that prioritize clarity, stability, and emotional balance, allowing peace to become a steady internal state rather than a temporary reaction to favorable external conditions. Focus plays a powerful role in shaping emotional strength because the human mind can only give deep attention to a limited number of thoughts at any given moment. What a person chooses to focus on repeatedly begins to dominate their internal experience. If attention is consistently directed toward problems, risks, and uncertainties, the mind naturally amplifies feelings of fear and stress. On the other hand, when attention is directed towards solutions, possibilities, and areas of control, emotional stability begins to increase. This demonstrates that focus is not merely about concentration, but about determining which mental patterns become stronger over time. The mind functions similarly to a spotlight in a dark room. Wherever the spotlight is directed becomes the center of awareness, while everything outside of that beam fades into the background. When individuals focus on threats or negative possibilities, those concerns appear larger and more urgent than they may actually be. Even small issues can feel overwhelming if they receive constant attention. This is why people sometimes experience intense anxiety about situations that are relatively minor in objective terms. The emotional intensity is not always proportional to the actual problem, but rather to the amount of mental focus placed on it. Emotional strength develops when individuals learn to intentionally direct their focus rather than allowing it to be controlled by automatic reactions. The human brain naturally gravitates toward negative information because it is designed to prioritize survival. This tendency, often called negativity bias, causes the mind to notice potential dangers more quickly than positive opportunities. Without conscious effort, attention can easily become trapped in cycles of worry or fear. Training focus involves recognizing when attention has shifted toward unhelpful thoughts and deliberately redirecting it toward more constructive areas. Another important aspect of focus is its relationship with perception. What a person consistently pays attention to shapes how they interpret their environment. For example, someone who focuses primarily on past failures may begin to perceive themselves as incapable, even if they have experienced many successes. This perception influences confidence, motivation, and emotional resilience. In contrast, individuals who focus on their strengths and past achievements tend to develop a more balanced and empowering view of themselves, which enhances emotional stability. Focus also influences how the mind processes challenges. When attention is scattered across many worries at once, the brain becomes overloaded, making it difficult to think clearly or respond effectively. This mental overload can intensify feelings of helplessness and anxiety. However, when individuals concentrate on one manageable task or step at a time, challenges appear less overwhelming. This focused approach allows the mind to engage in problem solving rather than rumination, strengthening a sense of control and reducing emotional distress. The ability to maintain focus is strengthened through practice. Techniques such as mindful attention, deliberate goal setting, and limiting distractions help train the brain to stay directed toward chosen priorities. Over time, this practice builds mental discipline, enabling individuals to remain steady even when facing uncertainty or stress. As focus becomes more intentional and stable, emotional reactions gradually become more balanced, allowing individuals to respond thoughtfully rather than react impulsively to circumstances. Authority over fear comes from understanding one's identity and purpose, because fear often gains power when a person feels disconnected from who they truly are or uncertain about why they exist. When individuals lack clarity about their identity, they are more likely to define themselves by external circumstances, opinions, or temporary failures. This creates vulnerability because anything outside themselves, criticism, rejection, or unexpected events can easily shake their sense of stability. Fear takes advantage of this uncertainty, convincing the mind that danger is unavoidable or that the individual is powerless to act. In contrast, a strong understanding of identity provides an unshakable foundation from which fear loses its influence. Knowing one's identity involves recognizing inherent worth, abilities, and unique traits. It is the acknowledgement that one has intrinsic value independent of achievements, social approval, or circumstances. When a person is grounded in this understanding, fear loses its capacity to dominate because it cannot threaten the core of who they are. Even if external conditions are challenging, the individual retains confidence that they are capable of handling difficulties. This internal assurance changes how fear is perceived, not as an overwhelming force that must control decisions, but as a signal that can be acknowledged, assessed, and managed. Purpose complements identity by giving direction to life's actions and decisions. When someone knows why they exist and what they are meant to achieve, they develop clarity about which challenges are significant and which are distractions. Fear often thrives when attention is scattered, when it is unclear what truly matters. Purpose acts like a compass, helping individuals prioritize their energy and focus on meaningful actions rather than being immobilized by imagined threats. With a clear sense of purpose, obstacles become stepping stones rather than insurmountable barriers, and fear is reframed as a temporary challenge to navigate rather than an ultimate danger. Authority over fear also requires recognizing personal power and agency. Many people experience fear because they feel helpless in the face of circumstances beyond their control. Understanding identity and purpose strengthens the perception of agency, emphasizing what can be influenced rather than fixating on what cannot. This mindset shifts the emotional response from panic to proactive engagement. Instead of being paralyzed by what might go wrong, individuals are empowered to take decisive action, which naturally reduces the intensity of fear and anxiety. Another critical element is the alignment of beliefs, values, and actions. When identity and purpose are well understood, decisions are made in accordance with this internal truth. Fear loses influence when actions are consistent with a person's core principles, because the mind recognizes stability and integrity. Even in high-pressure situations, individuals grounded in their identity and purpose maintain clarity, emotional balance, and resilience, preventing fear from dictating their choices or responses. Developing authority over fear is therefore both an inward and outward process. Internally, it requires deep reflection, self-awareness, and acceptance of personal strengths and limitations. Externally, it manifests in intentional action aligned with values and objectives. By integrating identity, purpose, and agency, fear no longer has the space to dominate thought patterns, emotions, or behavior. This authority transforms fear from a controlling force into a manageable influence that can be observed, understood, and ultimately overcome. Fear and anxiety lose their power when you refuse to let them define you. It begins with understanding who you are, why you exist, and choosing to fill your mind with truth, focus, and purpose. Each step you take toward clarity and inner conviction weakens the hold of imagined threats. Remember, fear only controls the mind that allows it. Today, make a decision to replace worry with awareness, doubt with confidence, and panic with calm. When you do this consistently, peace becomes a natural state, and anxiety no longer dictates your life. Stand firm. Fear has no authority over you.